The silence in the conference room of the Intercontinental Hotel in Chicago was so heavy, it felt like it could crush the air. 17 businessmen in tailored Italian suits stared, speechless, at the man in a worn plaid shirt and muddy boots who had just signed a contract worth $17 million. The company lawyer dropped his pen. The sales director ran a hand across his forehead in disbelief. And Mark Jennings, the same man who half an hour earlier had been thrown out of the lobby and called illiterate, now held that document as if it were a death sentence against arrogance itself. How did a simple farmer from rural Texas manage to humiliate a corporate elite from New York City in less than 30 minutes? And why would no one in that room ever forget the smell of damp earth that came in with him? But let's start from the beginning. 3 days earlier, on a suffocating August morning, Mark Jennings was 52 with calloused hands and a 240-acre coffee farm near Waco, Texas. He woke up every day at 4:30 in the morning. His routine included checking soil moisture, overseeing the harvest, negotiating with buyers, and on weekends, studying agricultural contracts through an online course he took secretly from his family. No one knew, but Mark had a hidden talent, an eidetic memory for numbers and legal clauses. He could read a document once and remember every comma, every percentage, every deadline. It was a skill he'd developed at 17, when his father was cheated by a middleman and lost an entire harvest. From that day on, Mark swore he would never be fooled again, and he studied, alone, quietly. That Tuesday in August, he got a call. On the other end, a female voice, impatient. "Mr. Mark Jennings, this is Apex Construction. We're interested in the expansion area of your farm. Could you attend a meeting in New York this Friday, 10 a.m., at the Intercontinental Hotel? We'll present our purchase proposal." Mark pressed the phone to his ear. The expansion area was a 79-acre plot he had bought 5 years earlier, not yet in use. It sat on a hill with a privileged view of the lake. He knew it was valuable, but he never imagined someone would come all the way from New York for it. "I'll be there," he said in his deep, steady voice. "Perfect. Please bring your ID, tax number, and property deed. Do you have legal representation?" "I don't need one." The woman laughed, short, almost mocking. "Understood. See you Friday." And she hung up. Mark looked out the kitchen window. The plantation stretched as far as his eyes could see. He knew that meeting wouldn't be simple. People from New York didn't travel 1,500 miles to make fair offers. They came to swallow small landowners whole. But he was ready. Friday, 9:45 a.m. Mark parked his Ford F-250 pickup in the underground garage of the Intercontinental Hotel on 6th Avenue. He had left Waco at 3 in the morning. He could still taste the reheated coffee. He wore dark jeans, a blue and white plaid shirt, and the boots he used when going into town. Not work boots covered in mud, but not dress shoes either. As he stepped into the lobby, the cold air hit his face. The marble floor shone so much it reflected the crystal chandeliers. Mark walked to the reception desk. Behind the counter, a young woman in a black blazer and perfectly tied bun looked up and frowned. "How can I help you?" "I have a meeting at 10 o'clock. Orchid Room, Apex Construction." The receptionist looked at her computer screen, then at him, then back to the screen. "Name?" "Mark Jennings," she typed, paused, typed again. "Not listed." "What do you mean, not listed? I got a call Tuesday." "Sir, there's no Mark Jennings on the guest list." Her tone shifted, colder now. "Are you sure it's this hotel?" Mark took his phone from his pocket and showed her the call log. "I'm sure," she sighed. "I'll call the room, but you'll need to wait over there." She pointed to a couch beside a decorative plant, far from the main entrance, out of sight. Mark sat down. 5 minutes, 10, 15. That's when a man in a charcoal grey suit, navy blue tie, and slicked-back silver hair crossed the lobby. He was followed by 2 assistants carrying leather folders. The man walked right past Mark without a glance, but one of the assistants stopped, whispered something to him. The man turned his head, spotted Mark, and walked toward him with long, quick strides. "You're the owner of the Waco property?" Mark stood up. "I am." The man looked him over from head to toe, his gaze sharp as a blade. "I thought you'd send a representative. Didn't know you'd come in person." "It's me." "I see." The man extended his hand, gripped too tightly, then let go fast. "Richard Vaughan, commercial director at Apex. Let's head to the room. Just a heads up. This is a technical meeting. If you don't understand the terms, we'll explain slowly." The tone was patronizing. Mark simply nodded. They walked through the corridors of the hotel. The walls covered in beige wallpaper with golden reliefs. The carpets muffled their steps. Richard walked ahead, speaking quietly on the phone. Mark caught fragments. "Yeah, he showed up. No lawyer? Perfect." The door to the orchid room opened, and right then, Mark understood he was stepping into an arena. What he saw inside made his stomach twist, not because of the luxury, but because of the number of people waiting for him, or rather, waiting to eat him alive. The room fit about 25 people, but only 17 seats were taken, all around a polished mahogany table that looked like it had been stolen from a European palace. Bottles of imported mineral water, glass cups etched with crests, a projector beaming a PowerPoint presentation with the Apex Construction logo. Mark stepped in. Every head turned. Richard Vaughan made a broad gesture with his hand. "All right, everyone, our supplier has arrived." Supplier. The word echoed like an insult. A heavy man with red suspenders let out a short laugh. Thought he was the janitor. Another, younger, with glasses and perfectly gelled hair, whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Smells like a barn." Richard pointed to a single chair against the wall far from the table. "You can sit there, Mark. We'll explain the proposal, and then you sign." Mark didn't move. "I'd rather sit at the table." Silence. Richard blinked twice, as if he hadn't understood. "The table is for the executives and legal team. You're the seller. You don't need to join the technical discussion." "Yes, I do. I own the property. I want to hear every number." The man with the red suspenders burst into open laughter. "Every number. Do you even know what NPV means? Internal rate of return, discounted cash flow." Mark stared at him without blinking. "I understand contracts." "Contracts?" Richard crossed his arms. "Do you have a law degree?" "No." "Then how do you understand contracts?" "I read." The room erupted in muffled laughter. Someone slammed a hand on the table. A woman in a white blazer rolled her eyes. Richard stepped closer to Mark and lowered his voice, though loud enough for all to hear. "Look, no offense, but you're a farmer. Probably a good one, but this is high-end real estate business. We're talking about complex clauses, transfer of rights, exclusivity, assignment of liens. This isn't stuff for amateurs. You should have brought a lawyer." "I don't need a lawyer, I need respect." The air froze. Richard straightened up. "Fine. If you want respect, sit at the end of the table and stay quiet. We'll present the proposal. If you understand, great. If not, we'll simplify. But don't interrupt the meeting. Deal?" Mark walked to the chair at the end, sat down, placed the folder with his documents on his lap, and said nothing. The presentation began. Richard took control of the laptop. The first slide showed an aerial photo of Mark's land, 79 acres on a hillside, native vegetation preserved, access by a local road. "This is the property, prime location. Apex Construction intends to build a luxury gated community with 160 homes, a private clubhouse, gym, tennis courts, and a helipad." The next slide showed numbers. "Our budget for acquiring the land is $2.4 million. Mark didn't move, but his eyes glimmered. Richard went on. "Payment will be made in 3 installments, $800,000 at contract signing, $800,000 in 180 days, and $800,000 in 360 days, adjusted for inflation." The woman in the white blazer, the company's in-house attorney, added, "Additionally, Mr. Jennings agrees not to build, sell, or transfer any portion of the adjacent farmland within a 2-mile radius for the next 10 years. That's to preserve the project's exclusivity." Mark stayed still. The man in red suspenders, the CFO, chimed in, "Oh, and of course, all existing improvements on the property, fences, wells, paths, automatically transfer to Apex, no additional cost." Richard smiled. "It's a generous offer. $2.4 million for land that's basically sitting there. You grow anything there?" "No." "So it's just sitting idle." 2.4 million is life-changing money, Mark. You could buy another farm. Travel, I don't know. Have you ever seen 2.4 million in your account? Mark took a slow breath. Yes? The room went silent. Richard blinked. What do you mean, yes? Sold a batch of specialty coffee to Japan last year. Made 3.2 million. The CFO snorted. Sure, specialty coffee. The tone dripped with sarcasm. Richard composed himself again. Well, then you know the value of money. Perfect. Here's the contract. He nodded to one of the assistants, who brought a thick folder, more than 60 pages. Take it home. Read it carefully. Bring it signed next week. Mark took the contract, opened it to the first page, started reading. Silently. Richard glanced at his watch. Or if you prefer, we can summarize the main points right now. Mark turned the page, kept reading. 2 minutes passed. Richard cleared his throat. Mark, we have another meeting at 11. You can take it home. No need to read it here. Mark turned another page. The man with the red suspenders sighed loudly. He's really going to read all 60 pages? We're wasting time. The attorney folded her arms. Mr. Jennings, do you even understand what you're reading? Mark lifted his eyes. I do. Then tell me, what's the grace period for unilateral termination under Clause 3? Mark flipped back a few pages. Read. Then answered, 90 consecutive days from signing, with a certified written notice requiring acknowledgement of receipt. The attorney blinked, surprised. And the penalty? 2% of the total value, adjusted for inflation, plus 20% in attorney fees. The room went silent. Richard Vaughan frowned. You memorized that? I read it. No one reads 60 pages in 3 minutes. I do. The atmosphere began to shift. Arrogance turned into uneasy doubt. Mark kept turning pages, his dirt-stained index finger sliding across the lines. He paused, went back, mentally noted something, continued, until he stopped on page 42. Then he closed the contract. There's a problem. A chill ran down Richard Vaughan's spine. That countryman had just said there was a problem in a contract written by the best attorneys in New York. That couldn't be possible. Or could it? Richard forced a smile. Problem? What kind of problem? Mark opened the contract again and placed his finger over a specific paragraph on page 42. Clause 17, paragraph 2. It says the company has the right of first refusal on any future offer to purchase the adjacent area. That's fine. But in paragraph 4, subsection C, it states that if I refuse to sell, the company may take legal action to enforce indirect eminent domain under public interest. The woman in the white blazer leaned forward. Yes, that's a standard clause to protect the project. No, that's a clause of extortion. The silence was instant, heavy. Mark continued, calm but firm. Indirect eminent domain for public interest can only be applied by the government, not by a private company. That clause is void, and if it's void, the entire contract is tainted. Section 166 of the Civil Code, partial invalidity that contaminates the whole when the clause is essential to the legal agreement. The attorney turned pale. Richard looked at her. She looked at the CFO. The CFO looked down at the floor. Mark closed the contract and placed it on the table with a dull thud. Besides that, there are 3 more problems. 3? Richard swallowed hard. 3. First, the payment adjustment based on savings interest is outdated. Savings yield less than inflation. Either you adjust by CPI or by the base rate, or I don't sign. Second, the clause transferring improvements at no cost is abusive. The wells on that land supply part of my farm. If I transfer them, I lose production capacity. You'll compensate me for that. Third, the 10-year exclusivity radius of 2 miles prevents me from expanding my own property. That's a disproportionate restriction. Either reduce it to 5 years and 1 mile or I'm out. The room was dead silent. No one breathed. Richard tried to regain control. Look, Mark, these are technical points that can be adjusted. But the price is firm, 2.4 million. Mark stood up. The land is worth 8.4 million. The man in the red suspenders burst out laughing. 8.4 million? Are you out of your mind? No, I did the math. How? By the market value of the region, construction potential, projected real estate appreciation and environmental impact. You're planning to build 160 homes and sell each for at least $160,000. That's $25 million in gross revenue. After construction, marketing, permits and margins, you'll clear about 30%, meaning you'll profit around $7.5 million. And you want to pay me 2.4? That's theft. Richard's face turned pale. You don't know anything about real estate projection. Yes, I do. I read the National Association of Home Builders reports from the last 5 years. I know how much concrete, steel and labor cost. I know what you spend on advertising. I know everything. The attorney glanced at Richard and whispered, "He's right." "Shut up," Richard hissed back. Mark picked up his folder and walked toward the door. "Thank you for your time, but I'm not selling for $2.4 million. If you want to talk again, call me. But next time the offer will be different." He was already holding the doorknob when a deep voice from the back of the room cut through the air. "Wait." Mark turned around. A man who had been sitting quietly in the last chair, almost invisible until now, stood up. He was tall, slim, wearing a flawless navy blue suit, his white hair perfectly combed. He had remained silent the entire time, just watching. Only watching. Dito pelo chat GPT. Richard Vaughan turned pale. "Mr. Figueroa." The man raised a hand, signaling for silence. He walked slowly toward Mark. His polished leather shoes tapped against the floor in a steady rhythm. He stopped 3 feet away and extended his hand. "Lazarus Figueroa, president of Apex Construction." Mark shook his hand, firmly, eye to eye. Lazarus smiled, a thin, almost invisible smile. "You read the entire contract in 15 minutes. I did. And found 4 legal flaws. I did. And calculated our profit margin in your head. I did." Lazarus took 2 steps back, still smiling. "Richard told me you were just an uneducated farmer, that closing this deal would be easy." He turned to Richard with a cold stare. "Richard is an idiot." Richard lowered his head. Lazarus looked back at Mark. "You're right. The land is worth more than $2.4 million, but 8.4 is an exaggeration. The market won't support that. It will if you sell the homes for $1 million each instead of $800,000, and you will, because this is the only property in the area with an approved environmental license and direct access to the lake. If you lose this one, you'll have to find another site. That'll take you at least 2 years in new permits." Lazarus stayed silent, evaluating, calculating. Then he spoke. "How much do you want?" $7 million. Full payment up front, adjusted for inflation and base interest, plus a 3% participation clause over the net profit of the development. The room exploded. "That's insane," shouted the man with red suspenders. "He's out of his mind," yelled another. Lazarus raised his hand. Everyone fell silent. 3% of the net profit. You're asking for a profit share without being a partner. I'm asking for recognition of the asset I'm providing. Without my land, you don't have a project. Therefore, I deserve a share of the outcome." Lazarus crossed his arms. "And what if the project loses money?" "It won't. You're good at what you do, and I trust your work." Lazarus let out a short, genuine laugh. "You're bold. I'm fair." Lazarus walked to the window. He looked out at the city below, the skyline, the traffic, the grey haze of pollution. He stayed like that for almost a minute. No one dared to speak. Then he turned. "All right." Richard almost fell off his chair. "Mr. Figueroa, you can't. I can. And I will." Lazarus looked at the attorney. "Rewrite the contract. 7 million. Full payment up front. Inflation plus base rate adjustment. 3% of net profit. Paid annually. Remove the abusive clauses. Reduce the exclusivity term to 5 years and 1 mile. Compensation for the wells, $150,000. And print 2 copies, now." The attorney swallowed hard. "That'll take at least 40 minutes. Then move fast." Lazarus turned to Mark. "You stay, we'll have lunch while the contract's redone." 45 minutes later, Mark was back in the orchid room. The new contract had 19 pages. Clean, direct, no traps. He read it, page by page, with the same meticulous attention as before. When he finished, he looked up. "It's correct." Lazarus pushed a Mont Blanc pen across the table. "Then sign it." Mark took the pen, opened the last page, signed. Mark Jennings, firm, steady handwriting. Lazarus signed right after him. The room, still filled with the same 17 businessmen, was dead silent. No one laughed, no one smirked. Some stared at the floor, others at their hands. Richard's face was red with humiliation. Lazarus stood. "Welcome to business, Mark." Mark tucked his copy of the contract into his folder. "Thank you for the opportunity, and for the respect." Lazarus smiled. "You earned it." Mark left the room with his head held high, the faint smell of soil still clinging to his boots, but now $7 million richer, and with a lifelong share in a billion-dollar development. When he crossed the hotel lobby, the same receptionist from before was at the counter. She saw him, recognized him, and lowered her eyes, embarrassed. He said nothing, just nodded once, a simple nod, no resentment. Outside, the August sun blazed against the pavement. Mark climbed into his truck, started the engine, and sat there for a few seconds, hands on the wheel, heart still pounding. He thought of his father, the day they lost everything, the promise he made, and he smiled. He picked up his phone and called his wife. "Hey, honey, I closed the deal." On the other end, her voice came, disbelieving. "So how much?" $7 million, plus profit participation." Silence. Then a scream of joy that pierced through the line. Mark hung up, placed the phone in the cup holder, and drove back toward Waco. Never underestimate someone by the clothes they wear, the accent they carry, or the dirt under their nails. Competence isn't measured by degrees, intelligence doesn't wear a suit, and respect can't be negotiated. It's earned. 12 months later. The Lakeside Reserve community was inaugurated with French champagne, live piano music, and the presence of influencers, journalists, and local authorities. The 160 homes sold out in less than 8 months, each one for $1.1 million. Apex Construction recorded a net profit of $8.5 million. Mark Jennings received his 3% share, $255,000, paid directly into his account, just as the contract stated. He used part of that money to build an agricultural technical school in Waco, free of charge, offering courses in rural management, agribusiness contracts, and field technology. The school bore his father's name, the Anthony Jennings Institute. At the inauguration, Mark gave a short speech. He wore a plaid shirt, jeans, and boots. The same boots. Education isn't a luxury, it's a right. And knowledge doesn't belong to a social class. It belongs to the brave, the courage to learn, the courage to question, the courage to refuse to be treated as less just because you came from the countryside. My father never had that chance. But you will. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Among those present, standing quietly at the back of the room, was Lazarus Figueroa. He hadn't announced he would come. He simply appeared. And when Mark stepped off the stage, Lazarus hugged him. "You're a rare man, Mark. Very rare." "I'm persistent." "No, you're honest. And these days that's rarer than diamonds." That night, Mark drove back to his farm, parked his truck in the usual spot, climbed the wooden steps to the porch, sat in the rocking chair that once belonged to his grandfather, and looked up at the starry Texas sky. The wind carried the scent of ripe coffee, and for the first time in a long time, Mark felt the circle was complete. Not because he had money, but because he had proven, to himself and to the world, that dignity can't be bought. It's carried. He closed his eyes, heard the hum of crickets, the distant barking of farm dogs, the rustle of coffee leaves in the breeze, and he thought, "Dad, we made it." 3 months after the school's opening, Mark received a letter, a white envelope with no return address. Inside, a simple handwritten card. "Mark, I spent my whole life building buildings. You built something greater, self-respect and opportunity for others. Thank you for reminding me what truly matters. If you ever need anything, just call. Lazarus Figueroa. Mark placed the card in a drawer, next to the original land deed, next to an old faded photo of his father, and he went back to the fields, because in the end, Mark Jennings never wanted to be a businessman, never wanted to be famous, never wanted to prove anything to anyone. He only wanted what everyone deserves: respect, fairness, and the right to choose his own path. And he got it. When you walk into a room, it's not your suit that speaks for you, it's your confidence, it's not your diploma that protects you. It's the knowledge you built alone, late at night, in the books no one saw you read. Because in the end, the only weapon against arrogance is silent competence. And Mark Jennings had that weapon, forged in dirt, fire, and humiliation, sharpened by an intelligence no one expected. And when he walked out of that hotel with the signed contract under his arm, it wasn't the men in suits who won. It was the man with dirty boots, the man they called uneducated, the man who proved that education doesn't live in expensive universities. It lives in those who are hungry to learn and brave enough not to bow down. If this story inspired you, leave a like, share in the comments what moved you the most, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories of courage, strength, and redemption. Turn on the notification bell. Every new video is a life lesson worth hearing. The end.